Welcome, everyone. It's such a joy to have Susan Cain with us today on Yom Kippur. And as I've been sharing all through Yom Kippur, there's no question that there is disappointment about the fact that we can't be together as a community. But in a way, what we can do is have deeper conversations on Yom Kippur, conversations that maybe we wouldn't have had otherwise. And it's really a joy to have Susan Cain with us today. She has a very long bio that I'm just going to abbreviate, and you'll already be able to check out so much more about her. But Susan Cain is an attorney. She's had an esteemed career as a corporate lawyer and as a negotiations consultant. And she decided to leave that world to pursue quieter work on introversion. And that quieter work led to truly a groundbreaking bestseller called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And that book really touched a chord with so many people. And it led to two incredible TED Talks that have been viewed by millions. And it led to her co-founding what I guess would call a movement called Quiet Revolution, rethinking office settings, rethinking educational settings, and yet another incredible work called Quiet Power, the secret strengths of introverts. And Susan, I want to welcome you to this discussion on Yom Kippur, about Yom Kippur and about going inward. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Naomi. And I always feel like it's such a joy to get to speak to you. I think I've told you how much time I've spent with you, one of your books in particular, Einstein and the Rabbi. And there are just so many incredible truths and insights in your work, and also ways in which, like, I read this sentence or that sentence and think, that's a kindred spirit right there. I understand exactly what Naomi is talking about and where she's coming from. So it's really fantastic to get to be able to talk today. And of course, we also have a connection beyond our respective books, right?
Yes, we do. And I do, it's funny. I feel like I know you. We've spoken on the phone several times, but this is the first time I've looked into your eyes. But I definitely feel a connection, and we do have this unusual connection. I'm trying to decide how I should share it, or you should share it to begin with.
Would you like me to talk about the letter you first sent me, which is how we got to know each other?
Okay, why don't you share that, and I'll explain how I figured out who you were.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I don't know exactly. Actually, I'm looking to see. I have the letter right here, and I'm looking to see if there's a date. There isn't, so I don't know exactly when this was, but sometime in the years of flurry following when I published Quiet, and at the same time I was, my kids were really young, so you know what a chaotic time of life that is, and I was getting all different reader mail, and then this letter shows up in my mailbox, and I'm going to read a little bit of it. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So this letter says, "Dear Susan, my name is Naomi Levy, and I'm a rabbi in Los Angeles. I'm definitely an introvert, and your book Quiet was both a comfort and an inspiration to me." Then you say, "When I saw your TED Talk, I began shivering because your grandfather, Rabbi Israel Shore of blessed memory, was my rabbi and my role model." This is you speaking. And you're saying, "I grew up in Borough Park, and which is, for those who don't know, that's a section of Brooklyn. And our whole extended family belonged to Temple Beth El, which is where my grandfather was a rabbi. And now it's you speaking again. And you said, and your grandfather was the gentlest, kindest, wisest man. When I was in high school, my father was murdered in a mugging, and your grandfather buried my father. I remember my mother asking him to deliver his eulogy in Yiddish. I didn't understand the words he spoke, but even without words, your grandfather's soul reached out to my own. And then the letter goes on from there. This was actually when you were publishing your book that I loved so much, Einstein and the Rabbi, and so some of the letter talks about that.
I actually forgot exactly what I wrote.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I was very taken by you, with you. And I remember reading a piece in the New York Times first about your approach, and then watching your TED Talk. And it just from the beginning, it sort of reverberated through me, just this idea of, you know, what I so remember about summer camp and the duffel bag. And and as you were speaking, you started to describe that your grandfather was an introvert and he was scholarly, and the books that he had. And I was like, oh wow, you know. And then you never spoke his name, but just all the little pieces of what you had described, it became clear to me that your grandfather of blessed memory was my rabbi, Rabbi Shore.
Wait, now I'm actually having goosebumps. Are you saying you knew that just from my description with the talk? Like,
that's all I knew.
It with, I don't know, someone telling you what his name actually was?
When I watched the talk, I knew you were speaking of Rabbi Shore.
Wow.
And then I had to confirm it for sure,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I knew that in my bones, I knew that your grandfather was Rabbi Shore. And I think that it's such a beautiful coming full circle to speak with you on Yom Kippur, because yes, Rabbi Shore buried my grandfather, he buried my grandmother, he buried my father. But probably the most powerful memories of your grandfather are beholding him on the pulpit on Yom Kippur. I can picture him. I can picture his talit, which was silver. He had, I mean, it was a white talit, but all across here it was silver. And I always felt that the timbre of his voice also was silver. I can't explain that, but there was like a silver quality to the pitch. It was a much higher pitched voice than what you would expect to come out of him. And on Kol Nidre, he always gave a sermon in Yiddish. And again, I didn't understand what he was saying, but I understood exactly what he was saying. And he would cry. That was a sermon where he would go from speech to this very, very deep place.
Yeah.
And he would cry. And I didn't know what he was saying, but I knew that I knew what he was saying. So it's to me just b'sheret. It's just meant to be that we should be talking today, you, his granddaughter, on Yom Kippur, about Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to? Yeah.
I feel that way too, and it's also incredibly meaningful for me to hear your memory, because I never knew him in that context. You know, we didn't we lived about an hour's drive from each other, so I didn't know him through his role in his synagogue. You know, I knew him as the grandfather who would come to visit every week, and we would go to visit him, and he was a kind of magical and mythical figure in my life, and I think for our entire family. But, you know, I didn't see him in the context you're describing. Although none of it surprises me, you know, I kind of knew him the same way that you're describing.
And
you know what,
I lived maybe 2 blocks from him.
Right.
But the man that I knew was a holy man. And I clearly, I didn't know his private life, but I could sense the light in him and the yoke of what it meant to lead a community on the high holy days, what the yoke of that was for him. I could feel it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, it's funny because I remember, you know, when I was a little girl, I would hear him talking with my mother about this thing and that thing. And I didn't know very much Yiddish, but I would understand phrases here and there. And very often they would be talking about someone in his congregation, and I would hear the phrase "Oy nebuch." It was always "Oy nebuch," which, like, if you don't know, that means, for those listening, it means something like, "Oh, poor soul."
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and you know, and towards the end of his life, when I would go to visit him at the hospital, that was actually when I got to know some of the members of his congregation, because they would come to the hospital too, and I saw how clearly it was some of the real poor souls of his congregation who were coming with a kind of, like, how much he had meant to them, and how much those particular people had been his focus. And so it was like what I had heard about all my life, just in his day-to-day conversation. And then there they were in his hospital room. So
I think an enormous reverence and a deep gratitude. So Yom Kippur, this very holy day, and in my childhood, as I said, we were like a tribe. It was our family. My mother's brother's family lived next door to us, so their family. My mother's other brother's family lived on top of us, so their family. My grandparents lived on top of my uncle, so my grandparents, and all of us would go as a tribe to pray at Temple Bethel, your grandfather's shul. And the rabbis say that Yom Kippur, what we're supposed to be doing in Hebrew is called Cheshbon HaNefesh, and I guess we can translate it as soul searching.
mm-hmm.
As yes, we gather together as community, but the work of it is personal, and it's about looking inward. And I just think that the endeavor of Yom Kippur very much dovetails with what you have dedicated your life to. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to hear more about soul searching and our avoidance of it.
Yeah. Well, soul searching, I don't know. You know, I think there are some people for whom soul searching is kind of like where they live emotionally and mentally. And part of why I wrote the book that I did, and the book that I'm working on now, which is kind of an extension in a different direction I can tell you about. But it was because I was just noticing all my life that the desire to be quiet, the desire to turn inward, the desire to search one's soul, all these desires were somehow considered not right in our culture. You know, there's just this feeling of like, you're supposed to be constantly engaged in action. You should be outward focused. You should be doing, not thinking. You should be doing, not feeling. And a day like Yom Kippur is a day where those cultural injunctions are lifted, and that's the thing you're supposed to do. But there's the other 364 days a year, and I think that for some people, they really want on those 364 days to be freed to do more of that, and for other people, maybe they don't really want to go there, but benefit when they do, and I just felt like all of us desperately need more of that, and need together to build a culture that has more space for that.
Tell me about, from your perspective, what the healing is when we make space for that going inward, for quiet, for introspection.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you can't really do anything really without being able to spend time in solitude. And that's true. I mean, it's true even for things like making outward facing decisions, that if you're only making your decisions, let's say, when you're surrounded by other people, we as human beings, we're so porous, and we're designed to be that way because we are inherently social beings, that what we end up doing is taking in other people's opinions. We're kind of like buffeted by opinions, by viewpoints, by lenses of looking at the world, and we don't even know what our own are. And so I've seen this across different realms. Like I've interviewed military commanders, General Stanley McChrystal, and a guy named Charles Krulak, who was the commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, who told me that they both described themselves as introverts. And they both told me that they found that they couldn't make as effective decisions and have the courage of their convictions if they didn't go off by themselves to know what they truly believed. And then you find the same thing when you talk to creative leaders, like Philippe Starck, who's one of the great designers of our time, says that he spends, I think it's from May through September every year, completely by himself. And during that time, he won't even pick up a magazine or socialize at all, because he knows that if he wants access to his own creative vision, the only way to do that is by going inside. Because if you're around others, you're picking up their creative vision, and you want that too, right? Like you want the interchange, and you can't really advance anything or have great ideas if you don't also have access to what others think and communicate with them what you think. But you also need that time to figure out your personal true north and your vision. So what we really need to be our most healthy is a kind of yin and yang between those two states. There's nothing wrong with the outward state. We need the outward state desperately. It's just that we need the inward state desperately too. And our culture tends to be quite lopsided, where we have all outward and no inward.
And it seems as if for quite some time, particularly with millennials, that it was getting more and more that way. In other words, I can think of the young people I know, and sort of the offices that they were working in were just this complete, nobody has their own desk, nobody has their own space, everything is just a giant playground type of atmosphere. And with children as well, this sense that the better classroom or the more effective classroom is this sort of open, not kids sitting in rows. Like kids sitting in rows was the wrong, was the old world. It was the wrong way. And I love sort of your take on it, and how it just completely discounts the person who actually needs their own space. And actually the rabbis say that each person has Daled Amot, which actually eerily with this pandemic, it means that each person has 6 feet in every direction that's theirs. That's like sort of their private, like they're entitled to that. It's like their domain.
Yes.
And what happens when we take that away, when we take sort of, it's like our divine domain away.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And like, I'll tell you, so like when I first started researching quiet, I decided that I would spend time visiting classrooms in schools across the country. And I wasn't really looking for anything in particular. I was just sort of going just to see what kids' experiences, excuse me, I was going just to see what kids' experiences of life were. And I was actually shocked because at that time, my kids were still really little, so, or maybe this was even before they were born. So I hadn't been at that time inside a classroom in decades. And I was shocked by how much things had changed. You know, like I remember growing up and spending quite a bit of time in the classroom inside the domain of my own mind, right? You know, like doing a writing exercise or math or whatever. But what I found is that in education, like everything has moved towards group work and the primacy of group work, and even in doing things like math and creative writing, you know, in some classrooms there would be like little signs up on the wall that would say things like, you know, they would divide the kids up into groups, right? And then they would say, you can't ask a question of the teacher unless everyone in your group has that question. You know, and the idea is like everything's supposed to get worked out through the group, through the committee. And to me, that's a kind of sacrilege, because the kind of Talmudic discourse between the teacher and the student, there's something incredibly important about that, and opening up the student's questioning mind. The idea that all questions have to pass through the pipeline of group dynamics before they can see the light of day, I think is disastrous to the human spirit and to thought. So, which isn't to say we don't have to learn to work within groups, because we do. It's just, again, you know, the lopsidedness. And as you say, you know, so this is in education, and as you say, it's in our workplaces also, where until the pandemic came, everything has been moving towards the open office plan, which there too, like that was interesting when I was doing my research, you know, in all the news articles about it, and if you would talk to CEOs about it, they would all tout the incredible creative virtues of the open plan office, where creative ideas could be exchanged freely. But then you would actually talk to people on the ground, and they would tell you, I hate this, and I can't think, and I'm getting interrupted all the time, and I feel like I'm on display, and it's shutting down my mental process, and it's shutting down my creativity. You know, and years later, the research started to come out showing that what people were reporting on the ground was actually true and real. So, yeah, so all I'm really saying is we need to create a cultural space for solitude, not 100% of the time, not 100% of our spaces, but it has to be there. And you know,
I can tell you that when I first became a rabbi of a congregation in my synagogue, I definitely am more introverted than extroverted. I had an office, but people would sort of knock and walk in all the time, where my door would be open and people would be coming and going, and it was a preschool, right? You know, sort of sharing the wall with me. And I thought there was something the matter with me, because I couldn't write my sermons. I couldn't get anything done. So it meant that I was at shul all day, and then only later, after having been there all day, could I begin to think. And I remember I thought that there was some, I thought, am I ADD? And I actually went for all this testing.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And because, I mean, I've been through school, been through college, you know, been through rabbinical school, but this woman who tested me said, you know, I think you're the type of person who needs quiet to actually go inside and think. And she said, my advice to you is go home as many times as you need to during the day to get your inner work and come back. So when I was a young rabbi, I was like 26 at the time, I used to come back and forth, you know, maybe 3 or 4 times a day to sort of just get the quiet that I needed to do some deep prayer work or deep sermon writing, and then come back to be out, you know, out there with people. But I just think that what you have touched upon it's a game changer for so many of us. And yes.
No, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was just going to ask, do you think that the people who know you through your work, through your congregation, who are listening right now, are they surprised to hear this, or is it very plain to anyone who knows you well that you would feel this way?
I think that the people who know me best, they will tell you, no, me's an introvert. But I think that people who don't know me as well, probably many people assume I'm an extrovert because I'm a rabbi, because I'm on the pulpit, because I have a large flock. They assume that I'm extroverted. And sometimes people are a little bit confused because I'm sort of extroverted on the pulpit, but maybe more introverted off the pulpit. So maybe, you know, and it can be confusing. Some people might interpret it as shyness. Occasionally somebody might interpret it as coldness.
Yeah.
But it's neither of those things. It's actually, I have a strong interior life that pulls me, that's sort of my base camp.
Yeah. And we've talked about this, that there are a lot of people who are out in the public eye in one form or another, like performers or journalists or whatever, who kind of, you know, tone it up when they're in the public, but then feel the way you do as soon as they come out of that public role. And sometimes with TV anchor people or you know, actors, you'll hear people say, oh, this person is so aloof and phony because, you know, when the cameras are on, they seem so warm and friendly. And then as soon as the cameras are off, they become very cold. And I always think when I hear that, I don't think that's coldness. I think that for 9 out of 10 of those people, they're just recharging and needing to come back into a different kind of space once the camera turns off. So, which is just one kind of version of ways in which we need to understand each other much more deeply than we do when we only look at each other through our on versions.
Yeah. And one of the things that we had talked about, you and me, was it suddenly came out of my mouth and I hadn't thought about it before, but that somehow in leading people from the pulpit, I think what makes me more comfortable is I feel on some level that it's my soul connecting with their souls, as opposed to my ego connecting with or reacting to their egos. That something much deeper is happening. And when I do have a soul conversation with someone, I'm very comfortable. But I'm maybe not as comfortable sort of making chatter or small talk. It's a little bit less comfortable, but I'm very comfortable talking to you.
Yeah, and vice versa. And, you know, I actually think also sorry, I'm just adjusting this. I also think that part of what you're getting at is that part of the discomfort in any social interaction, but especially one where you're on or, you know, on stage or something, is that to some extent you're feeling like a sense of one is feeling a sense of social judgment. But when you're in the mode of soul connection, which I know is what you've really been able to cultivate with your congregation, the question of judgment, maybe it's never gone completely between humans, but it's really like all the way over there. I mean, that's really the domain of ego. And I found, because I've talked about how I used to be really terrified of public speaking, and now, ironically, I do it all the time. I'm constantly public speaking. And one of the ways that I got over my fear was by making this profound mental shift between, from focusing on how is the audience going to judge me and how was I coming across, which is what I used to be obsessed with, and that was very paralyzing, to a place of thinking, okay, what do I have to give the audience, and what might I have to share? And is there one person sitting out there whose child might benefit, or who might benefit themselves by something I might say today? And as long as I get through to one of those people, then it's all good. And that's a really profound shift. And when you talk about moving from ego to soul, I think that the more we could all do that in all of our social interactions, the better off everybody is, and the calmer we start to feel.
You just said something that's so Yom Kippur, because there's this this fantastical rabbinic question: does God pray? And the answer is yes, God prays. What's God's prayer? May it be my will that I not judge my people from the place of judgment, or not behold my people from the place of judgment, but rather from the place of compassion. And they say that sort of the divine moves from the throne of judgment to the throne of compassion. And I've been thinking a lot about it right now, as most synagogues have gone virtual, is that there's been a lot of this judgment around it. Are you going to be live? Are you going to be pre-recording? Are you going to be having a static camera? Are you going to have a big setup? And I don't know, all these questions. Will there be a video montage on Yizkor or not? All these questions. And I basically just said to a colleague, I said, we're all going to have to be just a lot more compassionate right now. And we're not meant to be treating Yom Kippur as film critics. We're just doing our best. And I love what you just said about moving away from worrying about judgment, and getting to the place that we all want to get to, which was, can I help someone?
Yeah.
How important is it for me to overcome whatever fear of judgment that we each live with, to get to the place that's more important, which is, who can I help? Who can I lift up? Who can I help see themselves or this world through a different lens that will actually free them from whatever obstacles are kind of holding them fixed in place. And I think that these days that we've been sheltering in place on some level during this pandemic, this horrific pandemic, probably those of us who are more introverted are having assuming that we're healthy and able to pay the rent and have food on the table, that it's an easier shift for us than for those of us who are deeply extroverted.
Yeah.
And I told you that there was a colleague of mine, I told him that we were going to be having this conversation, and he said to me, Rabbi, I'm a complete extrovert. And during this time, during the pandemic, it's forced me to be quieter. It's forced me to go inside. And I know that sooner or later, this pandemic is going to end. And I'm just praying that what I've learned, I won't forget. because it's helping me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's amazing that that person has actually been able to get to that place, because there also are a lot of people who are just people, especially who are more extroverted, who are just plain emotionally struggling with the situation, and you can understand that also. I think, though, at the same time, that we, all of us, are living in a culture that's so hyped up and so 24/7 on, that it's not good for any of us, extroverts included. And that's why, long before there was ever a pandemic, we've seen this resurgence of yoga and meditation and practices like that. And it's because we all have that need. Extroverts too, and in some ways extroverts the most, because extroverts don't seek it out as naturally. Like an introvert doesn't have to go to yoga class to get to that space. They're going to be finding a way to sequester themselves no matter what. And they don't need a pandemic to do it either, though it can help out. But for extroverts, they might really need to carve out that space, just the way for introverts, they will often need to kind of give themselves, a little bit of a push to go and chat with colleagues, or chat with the cashier at the supermarket, or whatever it is. These little interactions that actually lift us all up, but introverts might not be inclined to do them. So I think we all have these places where giving ourselves that push and retaining the knowledge that we get when we make the push and see how it benefits us.
Yeah, I think what you said was so important, that you pushed yourself to speak publicly, and with time it became more and more natural to you. So I think from both ends, the question is, just like this comment of mine was saying, is can I make a permanent change? Can it somehow continue to grow inside of me so that I feel like a more balanced person?
Yeah. And I think with all those changes, they have to be structural, or else we're not going to do them, because nobody's going to go against their comfort zone that much of the time unless it's really like embedded into the structure of your life. So, like for your person who you're talking about, I actually would suggest finding whatever it is, whether it's building in, every day at 10 a.m. I meditate, or whatever works for that person. It's got to kind of become integrated into the daily fabric.
Which is one of the things that's interesting about Yom Kippur is we do this, Ashamnu Bagadnu, we do this, what we call in Hebrew the Vidoy, this confessional.
Yeah.
People don't realize that it's also actually a daily practice, that it's in our daily prayers, but we associate it. I mean, we don't actually do the fist, but we say all these very similar words. But I just was curious if you had thoughts about the confessional, or memories of it, associations with it.
Yeah, I do. I'm always really struck by it every year. The different things that we confess to. The one that always stands out for me for some reason is this year I was stiff-necked, and I guess it stands out because I have a stubborn streak. So I always think, I mean, I think I remember the first time I came across it, I thought, oh yeah, that's actually really not good. It's not just like a neutral personality trait, but it's really something that can get in the way. But I guess I think about that in the following context too, and I'll tell you a story that will seem separate, but then I'll come back to your question. So there was this article that was published in the New York Times, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, and it became the most viral story for that weekend. And it was a story of this woman who had lost her dog, and she loved her dog, and she went looking for the dog everywhere and couldn't find it. And she literally quit her job so she could keep looking. And she was searching kind of, I think it was the wilderness of Montana, looking all over for her dog, and the community learned about it. And all these people came forth with all this kindness, and were giving her a place to stay and helping her. And finally one of the people who had come to help called this woman and said, I see a dog in my backyard, and the dog is mangy and hungry and scared and won't come anywhere near me, but I think it might be your dog. I'm not sure. And the woman comes over to the backyard, and the dog has been like cowering in the woods, but the dog recognizes her, and it is in fact her dog, and the dog comes jumping into her arms, and it's this beautiful reunion. And I read this story, and I was sitting in a cafe at the time, and you call it shivering, I call it goosebumps, but same thing, and I got all teary, and I thought to myself that act of this woman dropping everything to find her dog, and all these people trying to help her, were these acts of pure love. Coming back to the feeling of longing and yearning, which is what I think Yom Kippur is actually really about, at least to me. That melody, it's a melody of just the most intense yearning for another world, another dimension that you can possibly imagine. And it's actually, this is an experience I've had every year at Yom Kippur. I've had it other times also. I'm actually even writing my whole next book really about this, that there's, or I should say my next book is the impetus for it comes from the following thing, that there's some music that you listen to, it's all about, it's sad music, right? So you would think, well, it would just make you sad, but somehow you have a response to it of incredible uplift. It's almost like a kind of ecstatic response to ostensibly minor key, bittersweet music, like what you hear at this moment during the service. And for years, like for decades, I have been trying to figure out, why would it be that this incredibly sad and yearning music makes me feel so uplifted and in some other plane apart from daily experience. And I think what really happens is that there's in all of us a kind of yearning for what I think of and call like the perfect and beautiful world. And we have different ways of expressing that. You could call it the Garden of Eden, or like the Sufis call it union with the beloved. Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz calls it somewhere over the rainbow, the world that, why, oh, why can't I get to that world? I think that that's what we're all really longing for at the end of the day, is getting to that place one way or another, whether we express it in kind of the spiritual idiom of Yom Kippur or a more secular idiom of the Wizard of Oz. It doesn't really matter. And so to me, what that blessing expresses and what the whole day expresses in general is really about that, and it's just this moment where we get that much closer to the perfect and beautiful world. So yeah, I always love to hear that melody. And you're a really good singer. I don't know if you want to hum it for us now, or if that's putting you on the spot, but it's very touching.
I'd be honored to. I first have a question about what you just said.
Sure.
I just want to clarify for myself.
Yeah.
There's two longings that I'm thinking of as you're speaking. One is the longing for what was, which is how I would characterize Eden. It's the longing for what was, for this blissful moment, like suckling at your mother's breast.
Yeah.
It's something that happened. You can't have it anymore. You can't nurse your mommy anymore. But it's that idyllic, perfect. I remember when I was nursing, I thought there was something wrong with my son because he stopped pooping. And he just stopped pooping. I took him to the pediatrician and I said, there's something wrong. He must be impacted. He must be constipated. And he said, no, Mama. He said, there's a moment in which the exact nourishment that your breasts are providing, that your breast milk is providing, is exactly the amount that his body needs. And it's such a perfect balance that that there's just no excrement. So I was thinking about that, like oh, the longing for, like, when I think of a mournful song, I'm thinking of a longing for that we can't exactly have anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the longing of somewhere over the rainbow, which is I'm longing for the promised land, you know, I'm longing for the place that I haven't yet arrived at. And I'm curious, which one, or is it both?
I think they're exactly the same thing. It's like,
So
you
they're
know,
aligned.
yeah, because I think we come into the world with that longing, and you know, and whether it's because we've known it for a brief moment, you know, when we were in the womb or nursing, or for more spiritual reasons, it kind of doesn't matter how you choose to look at it. I just think we come into the world knowing that this is so, that there's this place that we long for. And so, yeah, you can look backwards and see it, you could look forwards and see it, but it's,
Well,
it's the
Susan,
same
it's
thing.
so powerful what you're saying because of two things. One is the name of my community, which is called Nashuva, which
Uh-huh.
means we will return.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and Teshuvah, the same root, which is what we're supposed to be doing on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. You know, loosely translated poorly as repentance, it actually means to return. But the only way I can think of what Nashuva means or what Teshuvah means is to return
Yeah.
to something new.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
To return to some. So we say in Hebrew when we close the Ark of the Torah, Hashivenu Adonai Elecha Venashuva Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem, which I'll translate: turn us to you, O God, and we will return, restore, or renew our days as they once were. So it's this double pull towards this longing for the past that's connected to the future.
Yeah, that makes
Oh my
absolute
gosh.
perfect sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to sing it too. There's sort of the melody that goes in between
Mm-hmm.
the verses. I'll just sing you a little bit. So the traditional melody that I grew up on goes like this. Ya da ya da 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 ya da da ya da 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 da. Ya da ya da 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 ya da da. I die, 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 die. And then as the rabbi, you prompt the Kohanim,
Yeah.
so it kind of goes like this. And then the Kohanim have to repeat it word by word.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes like that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I don't
Saying that really beautifully.
know. So it is. It's mournful. It's holy. It's elevating, and in the sort of the instructions of the blessing, it basically says God is saying to the Kohanim, "You place these words on my people, and I myself will bless them."
Yeah.
So it's sort of, you know, we're talking about past and future. The Birkat Kohanim is about heaven and earth. It's about dissolving the barriers in this direction.
Yeah.
So I think
It's funny you say that because like I have the exact same emotional and spiritual response to Beethoven's Ode to Joy.
mm-hmm.
And I'm always struck that, you know, it's called Ode to Joy because it's extremely joyful and it's also extremely full of longing and mourning. You know, they're all like wrapped up together. And in fact, he wrote it when he was going deaf, and it was performed for the first time in a concert hall, and he was up on the stage, not able to hear very well as it was happening, and his back was turned to the audience. And one of the orchestra members, when they had finished performing, actually had to turn him around to face the audience so he could know that it was over, and to be able to see the audience who were like standing up with tears streaming down their faces and applauding, because he had carried them to this other place. And I don't know, I guess like when you hear music like that, and I know you know this because you talked in your book about how music is kind of like, at this higher level above everything. And I'm going to say the following thing. I don't mean it in a morbid way at all, or even in a sad way. But just when you hear music like that, you kind of know that it's okay that you and your beloveds are going to die one day, because there's something that's being communicated about something timeless, and you can actually feel that emotionally. And the longing that we experience on a day like Yom Kippur is about that timelessness, or it's for that timelessness.
And I actually, when you were saying that, I just was thinking about music certainly being one of the most powerful languages of the soul.
Oh yeah.
And on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, it was Shabbat. So you can't say the words, you're not supposed to say the words of Avinu Malkeinu. You don't say it on Shabbat. But I always say it Mashubah. That doesn't mean we can't sing the melody. And just sort of that feeling of going, and what it does to us. And I think that it does bridge that whole issue, introvert, extrovert, because it's no longer introvert, extrovert, it's just
it transcends that.
It's just one soul. And that's the way it transcends life and death. It just transcends the barriers. So I guess you led me to, I think what would be a beautiful way for us to conclude is something that I do every Shabbat, which would be to bless you and to bless all of us who are participating now with the Birkat Kohanim. Okay?
Thank you. That would be lovely. Thank you.
So I'm just telling everybody, just pretend, not pretend. My hands are on your head. They're just always on your head. Everyone. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God bless you and protect you. May God's very light be upon you, filling you with grace. And may God's very presence be with you, filling you with peace.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan, for this really beautiful, deep conversation.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And thank you for writing me that letter all those years ago. And by the way, this is my grandfather.
Oh my
when
God.
He was a young man. I don't know if you recognize him.
I didn't know him like that. I remember him with his white hair, his silver hair, his silver tallis, his silver voice. There's something about him that just go right through you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.